come down here a second because I have some show and tell items of sorts. Feels a little bit strange to be putting these on with my coat, or, well, tie on anyway. But, yep, come on up and have a seat. Actually, why don't you guys go over there this time? And I've got one of these, which is a rock, of course. And then I've got this brick sort of thing. And I wondered if you guys, what's the difference actually between these things? What do you think? This one has holes in it. Yep. But actually, let me give you kind of a hint at what I'm trying to get after here. If I go out in the field and find rocks, are these going to be a lot alike, or are they going to mostly be different from each other? Yeah, they're going to be. There you go. These are going to be different, but the brick, all of these things are going to be similar to one another, right? Now actually, Jesus, he was a carpenter, right? Did you know that from the Bible? So he gives a couple of metaphors, that is, stories about how, they kind of relate building to his ministry, right? And one of the things that I want to talk about with the older people today, the big people, I'm sorry, folks, is that the Bible actually calls us to be more like stones. It says that God forms us as stones. See, each stone is different from each person. Each stone is different from each other stone. And as people, we're different from one another. We're not to be like bricks, okay? But here's what I think Jesus is trying to get at. Each of us has our own unique experiences that have shaped us, and our own unique nooks and desires and way that we fit in is just special in God's plan. But what we tend to want to do instead is be more like our friends, more like other people, kind of try and go with the crowd. Even in our country today, when we hear about all this individuality, and how you can be what you want to be, we tend to still lump those groups into kind of brick-like groups and say, well, people that are, this way, then we make assumptions that the rest of them is also this, and the other thing, more like a brick. But the message here is kind of like this. Be happy that you're a stone, okay? Be happy that your experiences, even the hard ones, they're different than other people's, but God is shaping you for a special purpose. What do you think? That's kind of a hard one sometimes because, this guy over here has something that we want, right? Or his life looks nice and smooth and mine has this big rough lump in the middle, right? All right. Let me have at it with the big people here and see if I can make some more sense here. How's that? Thank you, guys. So actually, I have a show and tell item for the big people too, and actually two of them as well. These things, right? So Jesus, of course, was a carpenter before he was a minister or before he began his preaching. And he uses carpentry to give analogies kind of like the one that I gave to the kids this morning. And actually, if you've ever built something, you'll be able to relate to my story. I saw my dad remodel our house when I was a kid, and I just came to believe that the more nails I hammered into something, the stronger it was going to be. So my friends and I went to the local dump and pulled out plywood and old 2x4s and built ourselves a fort. And we made sure we hammered a lot of nails into that thing. But I was astonished that when the first wind came along, it actually tumbled my fort. So apparently it didn't have a lot to do with the nails. It has more to do with the foundation that we build on, right? And this is Jesus' analogy too. Jesus, you see, is the chief cornerstone laid in Zion, referred to by Peter and the Psalms. He's to be our foundation. But, more than that, I want to talk a little bit about the cornerstone, and that's kind of why I brought these things here. See, the cornerstone, if you've ever, I tend to think of larger buildings when I think of cornerstones. I don't really think that my house has a cornerstone, for example, but something like the Capitol or a fine structure does, right? The purpose of the cornerstone in the foundation is to have a basis from which to build. It's important that the cornerstone is true. So now true is, level, and actually got to turn it this way, plumb and square at the same time. So that makes the cornerstone a guide stone then from which the rest of the building can be built. And even if you haven't built a giant building, if you've ever built even your own house, you'll know that the carpenters come out and they pick a point somewhere, a reference point. And from that point, they measure level and true, square. That's kind of the role of the cornerstone. That's what Jesus is getting at. Our faith is to be that cornerstone. And right angles, by the way, are very important with this. When we build, if we build and we're not plumb, imagine this a second, the strength of the stud in the wall is that it is absolutely plumb. It's true. It's 90 degrees. If those studs lean a little to one side or the other, the weight of the floor above or roof will cause them to collapse. So getting the foundation right is very important. You see, the foundation that Christ wants us to build is for stability in our thought life. It's to be a guide stone, kind of like a compass, to point us in the right direction. It's for surety, for security in the storm, so that you can know, because you can be sure that all that can be shaken will be shaken. Our Bible tells us so. But when that happens, you can withstand it. Your faith will stand, and it will see you through those times. Add to this list, Jesus also refers to himself as a rock of salvation, or the basis upon which our salvation is certain. You see, the Bible is using another metaphor here, and it is the rock. And Christ says he's going to build his church upon this rock. Now, I know that this has been somewhat of a controversial thing over the years, but the rock that Jesus is talking about is himself. It's not Peter, although Peter figures into that story, and Peter's name, in fact, means rock. But what makes Peter a rock is the stability of his faith. He's hearing from God. He understands from God who Jesus is. And just in knowing that, he's got a foundation to build on. That's the rock that Jesus is building his church on. And so, we are to purpose our lives in a way that Jesus becomes our foundation, so that when the storms come, we can get through. And by the way, those storms, are they worth it? The trials, going back to my rock here a minute, don't we all tend to want to be like the next guy? Oh, the next guy isn't going through this storm. I wish I were in his position. He's not dealing with cancer. He's not dealing with the financial troubles I have, or whatever the problem may be. But those trials, they serve to shape us to the person that God needs us to be for his purpose. Can we trust that? Is the pain really worth it? And I think that the answer is that when we've gone through those, that the next time around, or the next step down the line, we know we can weather it. I spent 20 years in business for myself. I don't know how I'd have done that. I don't know how I'd have trusted to walk away from a paying job and count on myself and fortune, and really what I was counting on is God, to provide. I couldn't have done it if I didn't know that he would from previous experience. So, and another analogy to that might be kind of like the sports trainer here. Kevin and Fallon, you guys get this. I mean, if you're going to go out and compete, you need to stretch before you do this. You've actually brought somebody into your life to kind of torment you in a way, to make you stronger, right? But there's a purpose behind it. And our faith is similar to that. Our faith needs stretching. And it's upon that rock, this rock of faith, that Christ built his church. It says that, or the Bible says that, we are kind of a unique blend of our experiences, our desires, our loves, the things in our heart, and our temperament and what the world needs. We are living stones, Peter said in the reading that Jack read for us earlier. And I kind of imagine this. Imagine trying, it's hard enough to build a building out of stone. But imagine that you're trying to build it out of living stones and they run away. You're not using me there. I don't want to be next to that guy. I want to be higher up in the building. Don't put me down here. Oh, what is that, a chisel? Can you imagine what it would be like building a building with living stones? And yet that's us. Our different rough edges and our different shapes of, how we've been shaped by experience. These all figure into how God uses us in his grander plan. So we are unique, and we are to offer up spiritual sacrifice acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Now, this kind of fits in this way, I think. What is a spiritual sacrifice? Actually, a spiritual sacrifice is sacrificing myself, my desire, my right maybe, my pride, my offense, certainly. Lay that at God's feet instead of carrying it with me. And so this shapes these living stones into people that fit kind of the characteristics described also in Peter. A loving people that care and concerned about others. Anyway, the problem is, if we don't make Jesus our cornerstone, if we don't select him, choose him, make him precious, he becomes a stumbling block. And I want to make sure I'm clear on this. The word for stumbling block here, what we've translated as stumbling block, is rock of offense. And the concept that Peter is getting at here isn't sort of like, oops, I tripped. but rather it's willful stumbling. I fell because I intentionally wasn't careful. Rather, more even than that. Jesus becomes a rock of offense to those who refuse to believe the gospel message. Why would anyone not want to embrace this message? A message of grace and free salvation available to all. Well, we don't because, you would think we would. We all want free stuff. At least that's the way it seems when the politicians speak. But, at the end, of course, Jesus isn't what so many people want. He wasn't what the Jews wanted in his day. Why did they reject Jesus? Well, he didn't throw off Rome and liberate Israel. So, at the core, all of these things that we're supposed to spiritually sacrifice, we would rather hold on to those than make Christ our cornerstone. And that's how this becomes a stumbling block. So, do we today do this? Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think if we're honest with ourselves, each of us can find areas in our lives where we've likely stumbled because we've held on to offense, or our pride was stepped on somehow, or we believe that we have a right. Part of the problem with being a living stone is that our experiences are different from everyone else's. And we tend to look out at other people and think, why don't you just do it? Be reasonable, do it my way. But my way isn't right in their lives. Or we look out and we see that, your sin was X, but mine is Y. I don't know how you could be so dumb as to do X. Well, aren't we still both sinners in this case? So, how do we handle all of these things that we're supposed to sacrifice, these spiritual sacrifices? I think at the core of this are two main issues: pride and offense. I think that is the message that Jesus delivers. And, we should really be concerned about the latter here, about offense, because didn't we just earlier pray, Father, forgive me my sins in the same manner that I forgive those that sin against me? I think that's right at the core of what Jesus is saying here. So, if we cannot forgive others, neither can we forgive ourselves when we make mistakes. And certainly then, we're not very lenient with God when God doesn't seem to be working the way we think he ought to. I think these things are what Jesus is talking about. So, in the coming weeks, I want to zero in a little bit more on offense and talk about that and how that's